Hello, everyone. Welcome to the seventh episode of History Hoppers, where we'll take you to another hidden gem. We hope you enjoyed taking a quick history tour through the streets of Pompeii in our last video, and this topic is going to be very special. In today's video, we will be talking a bit of physics too, in addition to our usual content on historical places. So, Nivya, what are we going to talk about today?
Before we talk about what we will be covering in today's video, let me ask you a quick question. So, we all talk on our phones, use Wi Fi, internet, and transmit data all the time at a super quick speed. Do you think that communication happens via cables today? If you say yes, bravo. If you say no, get on this ride with us and understand the whole concept in the past and modern times. Long before undersea cables, ships carried letters across the ocean, taking days, weeks, or even months. In this video, you will discover how the revolutionary transatlantic cables transformed global communication and their significance in history and modern times alike. So, with that, let's dive into today's topic. So today we bring a very interesting place to limelight, the French cable station. It is a fascinating historical site located in Orleans, Massachusetts, and it played a major role in transatlantic communication during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The station transmitted government, commercial, and personal telegrams. It was especially crucial during World War I and II for secure, real time communication across the Atlantic. This cable station ceased its operations in 1959. In 1972, it was reopened as a museum by the French Cable Station Museum non-profit group. So, when you visit this cable station today, you can find original equipments housed in it, the equipments that were originally used for sending or receiving telegraphs. The station still harbors historic cable samples and communication logs. There are photos and documents from the cable station's heyday. There's also an actual telegraph room that was my personal favorite, and that one is largely preserved as it was in the early 1900s.
Very interesting, and I would love to know more. So, was this station at Cape Cod connected to any specific countries through the cable? And if yes, what kind of operations happened at the Cape Cod station on daily basis?
Yeah. So the French cable station that we are talking about today, it was primarily connected to France as part of the French Transatlantic Telegraph Network. It was the American landing point for the French transatlantic cable linking France to the United States. So this cable station was a busy, crucial communications hub. Here is what typically happened on a day to day basis. So, operators received incoming Morse code signals from the French side and transmitted outgoing messages across the Atlantic. There were people who monitored signal and maintained the cable lines for day to day efficient communication. There were people who did regular inspections and repairs of cable terminations, insulations, and telegraph apparatus. There were people who sorted messages and routed onward via landlines to other US cities or international destinations. There were also people who kept records of all messages, cable performance, and operational issues for accountability.
Very interesting. And thanks a lot for sharing that. So, what made the transatlantic cable such a game changer in communication history?
Yeah, so as you can see on the screen, that's a network of submarine cables that are laid across the globe. So doesn't it look like a network of spaghetti that is like spread across the map? So, uh, before I talk about how transatlantic cable, came as a game changer in communication, let's get our facts straight about the telegraph. So the Samuel Morse's telegraph in 1840 revolutionized land communication. By 1858, the first, though short lived, transatlantic telegraph cable enabled a message to cross the ocean in minutes, not weeks. Regular transatlantic telegraph communication was finally established in 1866. So, the transatlantic cable was a revolutionary breakthrough because it fundamentally collapsed the time and space gap between continents, ushering in the first era of instant global communication. There was drastic reduction in communication time. With the cable, the same message could be sent in minutes. The transatlantic cable made it possible to have real time communication between continents for the first time. It also gave birth to instant international news. Now, news could travel at the speed of electricity. There was revolution in business and finance. International markets, banks, and traders could exchange real time financial data and decisions. It also proved critical in diplomacy and war. Government and military leaders could quickly exchange information. Especially during wars and crises, cables became strategic assets. It was a technological marvel of the era. Laying a cable across the Atlantic in the 1850s to 1860s was like the moon landing of the Victorian era.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk more about the past time. So, how did people used to communicate before the undersea cables came into existence?
Yeah, before transatlantic cables were laid in the mid 19th century, communication between continents, especially between North America and Europe, was slow and entirely physical. So here is how it worked. People used to mail by ship. Sailing packets and steamships, letters and messages were carried across the Atlantic Ocean by sailing ships or steamships. The trip could take several weeks, sometimes even months, depending on the weather and ship condition. For example, a message sent from London to New York might take 3 to 6 weeks one way, with the reply taking just as long to return. Then people had newspapers and dispatches. Governments and news agencies sent written reports via ship. War reports, diplomatic messages, and international news were significantly delayed or often outdated by the time they arrived. People also had carrier pigeons that were of limited use, though. So, this method was unreliable and not used for transoceanic communication. Then there were messengers and human couriers that would physically carry letters and documents once a ship docked. Local and inland communication then relied on horses, trains, or stagecoaches. There were also role of shipping companies and postal services. Companies like the British Royal Mail and American Postal Services established regular packet ship schedules. Still, there was no real time communication, only what was physically transported.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the different kinds of material that were used in the transatlantic cables ever laid down.
Yeah, so on the screen, you see different cables of different diameter that basically represents their different layers. So the core layer was copper that was used to carry the electrical signal. On the copper layer was a layer of gutta percha. It is a natural latex that is derived from trees in Southeast Asia. It was the best waterproof insulator available at the time. So, this insulated the copper core to prevent signal loss and short circuits in water. Then, on top of gutta percha, there was a layer of tarred hemp or jute. The hemp was often saturated with tar or pitch to resist seawater and marine organisms. It provided additional waterproofing, cushioning, and protection around the gutta percha layer. On top of hemp or jute layer was wrought iron wires that gave mechanical strength to the cable, enabling it to withstand deep sea pressure and tension during laying. On top of all these layers was an additional tar and grease compound to seal the outer iron wires against seawater corrosion.
Very interesting, and we have learned a lot today. Thanks a lot for sharing that. So, what were some of the early challenges in laying cables deep under the ocean?
Yeah, laying fiber optic cables deep under the ocean, especially in the early days, was an immensely complex and high risk operation. So, some of the challenges that people faced back then was extreme ocean depth and pressure. So, cables had to be built in a way to withstand crushing pressure and remain intact for decades. Unpredictable underwater terrain. The seabed is not flat. It is filled with mountain ranges, trenches, volcanic ridges, and shifting tectonic plates. So people had to survey these regions, and often that led nowhere, which ultimately led to cable damage from abrasion, kinks, or collapse into deep trenches. Ocean conditions were harsh too. Weather at sea can delay or endanger cable laying missions. Storms and strong underwater currents could drag or damage the cable during installation. There was also natural hazards and danger of marine life rupturing or damaging the cable. Then there was issue of signal integrity over long distances. Fiber optic cables transmit data via electrical signals that could weaken over long distances due to attenuations. So engineers had to develop underwater repeaters or amplifiers spaced every 50 to 100 kilometer to boost the signal. Then there was also human activities near shorelines. Activities like fishing trawlers, anchors from ships, dredging operations could damage cables. So, cables near coastlines had to be buried or armored heavily. There was also financial risk and high cost. Laying a fiber optic cable in the ocean cost hundred of millions of dollars. So early investors and companies had to take on massive financial risk with no guarantee the cable would work or last.
Interesting. Okay, I would love to know more about the how messages actually used to send across Atlantic. So when was the first message successfully sent across Atlantic, and how long did it take?
Yeah, the first successful message sent across the Atlantic via the Transatlantic cable occurred on August 16, 1858. This was the message exchange between Queen Victoria and US President James Buchanan. The message was 98 words long, and it took over 16 hours to travel between Valentia Island in Ireland to Heart's Content in Newfoundland, Canada. So it took so long because the electrical signals degraded rapidly due to poor insulation and conductor materials. The cable also lacked amplifiers, so message had to be sent very slowly to be decipherable at the other end. Operators used Morse code and had to carefully time the pulses. The entire technology was so delicate that sending signals too fast could burn out the whole cable line. So that cable, the cable that was used to send the first message across Atlantic, worked for only 3 weeks before it failed permanently. And then people kept on working and troubleshooting, and then the first reliable and long lasting transatlantic cable was laid and became operational in July 1866 between the same stations. Message now could travel in minutes instead of weeks, marking the true beginning of instant global communication. The French cable station that we're talking about today, this one became operational around 1869 as part of expanding French transatlantic telegraph infrastructure.
Okay, amazing. I just want to let my viewers know that the image that you can see on the screen is the one that Nivea clicked when she was there at the French cable station at Cape Cod. So let's talk more about this image and what does this signify?
Yeah, so the dots and dots pattern that you see on this paper strip on your left side, the image in the inset. So the dots pattern represents the incoming message recorded on a strip of paper. And this is the primitive form of data storage, much like our USB drives.
Interesting. Okay, so what are these images?
So on the left, you see these wet cell batteries that would have supplied DC power for telegraph signal amplification or equipment operation. In cable stations like the French cable station, they were critical to keeping long distance underwater communication flowing reliably. On the right side, you see the cable spool. It is basically a long, tons of long cables that are rolled over a big wheel like structure to be used as and when needed.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about these two.
On the left side, you see a mirror galvanometer that is an extremely sensitive instrument designed to detect and measure very small electric currents that traveled through these, transatlantic cables. And this design was given by Lord Kelvin, and this is particularly famous for its higher sensitivity. So the way it works is when the needle moves to the right, it is the equivalent of a dot in Morse code. And conversely, when the needle moves to the left, it is the equivalent of a dash. An operator at the cable station had to constantly look at the movement of the light and note down the message in Morse code, then translate it to English and relay it to their colleagues.
Okay, so let's talk about the long distance siphon recorder.
Yeah, the long distance siphon recorder, as you see on the screen, it was an improvement over the Kelvin galvanometer that we saw in the previous on the previous slide. So in this one, instead of moving a light ray for an operator to monitor, the galvanometer was connected to a rudimentary ink pen, which moved left or right on a moving paper strip based on the receiving signal. The image in the inset shows the conversion between English letters to the corresponding pattern printed by the siphon recorder.
Okay, thanks a lot for sharing that. I think that was all from our side. I hope you learned a lot today, and we will see you in the next one. If you like our content, then please like, share, and subscribe our channel, and we'll see you in the next one. Till then, bye bye.